This is George Newbern, the voice of Superman.
This is Kevin Conroy, the voice of Batman.
And you're listening to the DCAU Review, hosted by Cal and Liam.
Streaming at DCAUReview.com and on your favorite podcast app.
Destroy Superman and the Justice League.
Help us.
Don't worry about me. Stop them.
I always do.
Here's the plan.
What plan? We kick their butts, right? Let's get this over with.
I'm going to destroy this.
Too much curiosity can be dangerous.
Maybe I like danger.
Gotta stop it before it's too late. Stay down.
Give me strength.
Let's move.
Aren't you gonna thank me?
Down, boy. They run like cowards. What are you waiting for?
Let me get us out of here. It's either that or prison again.
Justice League.
Hey everybody, welcome to the DCAU Review, episode 188. I am one of your hosts, Cal, and with me, my good friend, good brother, the man that runs our Twitter page. That's right, it's Liam. Liam, welcome to yet another episode here in the month of December of DCAU Review.
That is right. We are continuing our month celebrating 20 years of the original Justice League cartoon. We had an interesting one to talk about last week, and we have one this week that is equally as interesting to talk about, I think. That being another season 1 episode, that being Metamorphosis, parts 1 and 2.
That's right, and dutifully named because this episode, of course, introduces Rex Mason, aka he will be later known as Metamorpho. Actually a character that when we saw this originally, ironically we only had part 1, I believe, on tape. So we, for the longest time, we really didn't know how this episode ended up. So it was when, I think probably when we got it on DVD, we were finally able to realize what exactly happened in this episode. But this episode, it did introduce a character that we had been familiar with from just seeing seeing him in on different comic covers and in old books that we had, or I know that he had made some appearances in some of the detective comic runs in the 70s and 80s, I believe. So seeing him on covers and kind of knowing about him, but not really knowing who the character was, but excited to review this episode, as it's a pretty memorable one, as we kind of get that first expansion here, not only of villains in the DCAU, but another would-be hero / ally to the Justice League introduced here. But before we get into a review and the categories this week, Liam, we will, of course, once again, we have a pair of IMDb synopsis for this week's unsponsored IMDb synopsis segment. So without further ado, I'll turn that over to you. These episodes originally airing on the Cartoon Network back on October the 4th, 2002 and October the 11th, 2002, meaning actually we have a whole nother year before we celebrate the 20th anniversary of these particular episodes.
That's right, and these are the synopses for Metamorphosis parts 1 and 2, which were written by Len Yulee and Dwayne McDuffie, directed by Dan Reba, with music by the Dynamic Music Partners and animation by Coco. And that synopsis reads as such. Green Lantern's friend is transformed into a monstrous elemental shapeshifter by his jealous employer and is tricked into thinking Green Lantern is responsible. All right, part 2 here. A confused Mason / Metamorpho is finally convinced the League is there to help him. Together, they race to head off the newly transformed Stag before he kills Mason's fiancée, who is also his own daughter.
Oh, too wordy.
Too much of the second person there, too. Because the way that sentence is structured, it looks like Mason's fiancée is Mason's daughter, and that's it's gross and not what happened there. So
Even if there is some sort of weird undercurrent of
there's a little bit of that
possession by Simon Stagg, which we'll get into here in the plot as we begin to break this down, Liam. But we are actually introduced as we start the episode. We are introduced to a character who looks very odd. He sort of has, imagine if Wolverine was going bald. Like that's what we come to learn. Simon Stagg appears, and we actually aren't aware of it, but he's actually presenting a video of this mining accident that occurs. And in his presentation, he's presenting this boardroom and makes mention that they're constantly having these accidents, and due to that fact, that more and more insurance companies are refusing to sort of cover their employees, and they're sort of this in-between place, and it's costing the big business money, and it's costing lives. So he has an idea and a solution, and that is going to be this superhuman, genetically enhanced. It's always got to be a genetically enhanced person, right? A genetically enhanced, not super spider, but a genetically enhanced man, and he's going to change this guy so he's going to be able to survive in any condition. And he has this computer generated image of this guy surviving cold and extreme heat and a cave collapsing on him and all this stuff, and he managed to survive. And the board does their best to say that they're really not interested or impressed, and pretty much mock him for bringing in a computer generated image of this, despite the fact that they live in a time where there are just superheroes and aliens everywhere. These board members are not impressed because he's brought them basically a concept here.
Gentlemen, you have a problem. It was an accident. There were no fatalities.
You got lucky this time, Mr. Braddock. But because of unsafe conditions like this, the unions are demanding higher wages. And the insurance companies won't cover your risk. Luckily, I've got a solution.
Please enlighten us, Mr. Stagg.
I call it Metamorpho. A chemically altered worker who will not merely survive in most hazardous environments, but will thrive in them.
Stagg, we need a practical solution, not some half-baked computer-simulated fantasy.
I assure you, it's no fantasy. Stag Industries has sunk a fortune into developing this.
Hogwash. I'll believe it when I see it, but not until then.
They want proof. I'll give them proof. All I need is a volunteer.
That leaves Stagg sort of shaking his head and determining that he has to kind of put this plan into action and bring them solid proof that this idea of Project Metamorpho can actually come to life here. And that's kind of what where we get the plan put into motion.
Yeah. So it's interesting because part one of this is it's very centered on one member of the Justice League, which we did not get a lot of episodes that were really solely focused on a single league member like we have here. That, of course, being the one member being Green Lantern, John Stewart. As you said, there's a little bit of a subplot there as Simon Stagg instructs his henchman, this overgrown man who looks like a caveman, and if you go by the comics, it literally is a unfrozen caveman in Java, like the coffee, I guess.
Yep.
But yes, Java is sort of trying to transport this mutagen. He's on a train that our own fearless Rex Mason, who we're introduced to briefly on the train, who also happens to be on that train. But the mutagen has to be checked, and so it's kind of knocked around, and a vial of it spills, of course, as fate would have it. And the train appears to be in deep trouble, about to crash, when the Green Lantern himself, John Stewart, shows up and saves the day. And kind of in the aftermath there, he is able to know that he and John were in fact in the same platoon when they were in the army together, and they
Marines.
Marines. That's an important distinction. I apologize. But yes, they were in the Marines together, and so they agree to sort of catch up, and as John Stewart is sort of introduced to what Rex has been doing, they sort of have a little bit of dialogue about how, John basically traded one uniform for another. He's obviously not a Marine anymore, but he is still in a uniform, still taking orders, still kind of doing the soldier thing, whereas Rex sort of got out of that life and has moved into the private sector and is doing quite well for himself, not only financially, but also we're introduced to his love interest, Sapphire Stagg, the daughter of the aforementioned Simon Stagg, who's just portrayed as this lovely woman who, he's kind of got everything going for him. And that actually kind of comes into play a little bit later. But yes, that is sort of part of this. As while Green Lantern is talking with Rex and Sapphire, he gets a call from Batman, who has gone to investigate the train accident and notices that there was some sort of experimental mutagen that sort of ate through the wheels of the train and caused it to speed out of control. So Green Lantern sort of puts the screws to Rex a little bit and tells him that a company like Stag Industries would perhaps have something like this, and that causes Rex to go and kind of investigate, and in the process he sort of confronts Simon Stagg about it, who kind of blows him off and kind of threatens him, not as overtly, but sort of tells him to stay out of it and to mind his own business. And in the process there, Simon Stagg is also alerted that Rex agreed to stay out of it, but his way of staying out of it is quitting, moving to another city, and taking Simon Stagg's daughter with him. And this is the first part of where we get some of the aforementioned creepy undertones of the Simon Stagg infatuation with his own daughter, I guess you would say.
Hello, precious. I came as fast as I could.
Thanks, Daddy.
You said it was urgent. What's wrong?
That depends on your point of view.
What are you doing here?
Giving notice.
What?
I've accepted a job offer in Chicago.
And I'm going with him.
But you can't.
Daddy, I'm not your little girl anymore.
Don't try to stop us, Simon.
No, of course not. It's just such a shock. All I've ever wanted is for you to be happy. Are you sure about this?
Yes.
Then go with my blessings.
I'm glad you understand.
I'll clean out my desk tonight. No hard feelings? Dad?
Good night.
What happened, boss?
I believe I found my volunteer.
Yeah, there's definitely a creepy undertone there, and it maybe I don't know. I thought, I was like, am I reading into this? But I think ultimately when we see the culmination of it and we know what that sort of was based, what the culmination of this episode and what it is sort of giving an homage to, leads me to believe that it wasn't so much as like subvert as overt.
Yes. So, and we'll there certainly will be some dialogue in part 2 that I want to come back to that maybe expands on that a little bit. But yeah, so Mason decides to go clean out his desk. He's going to clear out, and in fact, he notices there's some sort of security breach, and he is caught in a lab accident, quote unquote.
Why would he like, he's in there cleaning his desk out. First of all, it's late at night when he's cleaning the desk out. All right, I get it. Maybe he wants to get out of there so he doesn't have to see Simon Stagg, right? He wants to avoid the conflict of moving forward. But when there's a security breach and he tries to call security and security isn't there, mind you, he's no longer an employee of this company. What possesses this guy to go and investigate what the security breach is? Because that's what ultimately leads to him. He would not have been transformed into this chemical monster if it wasn't for his curiosity and insistence on investigating what the security breach was at this company at which he is no longer an employee.
Yes. Not quite sure what I mean, I wouldn't, even if you're an employee, if you're not security, I think I would have just I would have probably just walked out the door either way. But yeah, especially in light of him planning to leave the company anyway. But he does go in and in fact is trapped in a big glass tube, and there's a very marvelly origin here as he's hit by some sort of noxious gas, which we find out later is mutagen, and also struck with some sort of energy beam at the same time. And when he awakens in the hospital bed, he's greeted by Simon Stagg, by Java, who is snapping pictures of him. And
my favorite bit
is a flash in broad daylight.
Yep, is Java the cameraman? Like that's his
pretty great.
That's his gimmick. He needs to take pictures of everything. He needs to document every single portion of this transformation.
Well, maybe he's the one like editing together these videos that Stag takes. Maybe he's like an amateur like cinematographer in his free time when he's not lugging chemicals around or whatever. But
unfrozen caveman, part-time artistic visionary when it comes to cinema and film.
I love it. That's at least like one of those DC showcase shorts, if it's not a full-length movie there. That's a free idea there. But anyway, so in sort of the aftermath there, Stag, Sapphire, and Java all sort of greet Mason, who looks in the mirror and in fact sees that he's transformed right out of the pages of the original comics that he appeared in. Metamorpho has been born here. He has kind of this brief altercation with some police officers. He gets hit by a truck and causes the truck to crash, and then sort of gets away from the police officers who, quite frankly, needlessly escalate the thing. He does accidentally reflect their bullets back at him, but then they shoot a rocket at him. That's move number 2 by these cops.
I was reminded, and this is going to be a deep cut, but I was reminded of that scene in Arrested Development where Franklin the puppet is sitting in the car, and the police pull up and they think that they like scream like he's being aggressive. So they like immediately pull out their guns at this puppet just because the puppet is sitting in the front seat of a car. Like
yes.
It was like he bounced the bullet. I get it, he bounces the bullets back at them, but they immediately declare war on this guy at that point.
Yes, and he's also like calling out in English. It's not like he's not speaking to them.
Right.
He's explaining that it was an accident, that he doesn't know what he's doing, and they're still just opening fire on him. But he gets away and is sort of confronts his Simon Stagg once again, sort of reiterates what this Metamorpho project was meant to be. But in the process, it's noted that Simon actually has a sort of ace up his sleeve, in that he is not going to take the blame for Mason's accidents, but says that it was purposefully sabotaged, but not by Simon, of course, but by John Stewart, the Green Lantern. And his evidence is, once again, the Chekhov's Java the photographer comes back here, as he snapped a couple of pictures of John comforting Sapphire at the scene of the accident where Metamorpho had sort of first burst onto the scene. And that sort of sets up our end of part 1, as John and Hawkgirl are taking down some bank robbers and actually having a little bit of a dialogue about where John speaks about how he's sort of wondering what could have been and wondering maybe if he made the right life choices, which I found interesting. And I wish they'd maybe focused on that more. I get part 2, as we'll talk about in a moment, is mostly a lot of action, and maybe there's less time for that. But I really think the most interesting thing kind of across these 2 parts is John meeting up with an old friend and chatting with him and seeing all the success that he's had and the sort of personal gratification that he has, and wondering what could have been. We kind of see snippets of that in Blackest Night, in one of the first episodes of the series, and then going forward a little bit into season 2, you see that one of his greatest fears in Only a Dream is that he is nothing apart from the ring, and that he isn't really a whole person anymore. So I really wish they had really focused on that more. But we do get some of that here with him sort of pouring his heart out to Hawkgirl a little bit.
Well, that was pretty darn sloppy.
Sorry.
Care to talk about it? Running into Mason after all these years, I guess it got me thinking, wondering about the choices I've made.
The road not taken?
Yeah. Maybe I could have been like him. Wealthy, successful.
Engaged to a beautiful woman?
It's Mace. Are you all right?
John, we have to talk.
I'll be right there. Stay here until the police arrive.
Wait!
Yeah, it's a nice little break from it, and we sort of course, in part two, we get the realization that maybe he's clearly just going through a bit of an identity crisis at this point, and there's probably a lot of emotional factors that are contributing to this. Him feeling, of course, somewhat responsible, even though he had nothing to do with it. Him being sort of perplexed at this point that Rex believes that he's responsible for it, and that that he's just angling to get his woman from him. And there's that sense of camaraderie also, I'm sure, also being the fact that he's a military man, leaving somebody sort of being dropped, leaving a man behind. Like, you don't leave a man behind, and this one of his former battalion members is now turned into this sort of chemical monster. So yeah, there's a lot of subtext that, and again, we're still here early in season 1, so you are still laying the groundwork for this deepening relationship between Hawkgirl and John. So it's interesting to see him showing a little bit of that softer side, that emotional, vulnerable side that maybe he hadn't shown, prior to this. So I did like that there was that feat was featured there, albeit just a little brief moment there. But so the culmination of part 1 is them having this giant fight between Metamorpho and John, as he's sort of lured to this place and is attacked by him, and then ultimately we get the rest of the Justice League showing up at the beginning of part 2, and really Metamorpho takes on the whole Justice League and kind of handles them pretty well. Like there's a pretty heavy battle in this sort of complex, and I don't know. I was trying to guess whether or not the vulnerabilities for the Leaguers tended to be like public knowledge, but we get a part where he's standing over John and about to kill him, and Superman shows up, saves the day, and then immediately Superman seems to have the upper hand, and then, pun intended, Metamorpho changes his hand into kryptonite, which starts to kill Superman. And John Stewart sort of has to scream, "You're killing him! You're killing him! What do you don't do it!" And then both Hawkgirl and Jean show up, and there's this really great battle fight between Jean, who transforms into a dragon in this fight, one of his favorite forms, and him and Metamorpho sort of swirling up. We'll talk about it in visuals, but there's this fight that occurs between them, and he at some point turns to fire as John is sort of overcome him. So again, recognizing another vulnerability here. I felt like we were just sort of missing maybe magic or something like that to sort of to subdue, or yellow, turning something into yellow to overpower GL. I'm not sure, but so at this point, they do sort of band together. The rest of the Justice League does, and they're sort of able to temporarily incapacitate Metamorpho, and he escapes through the sewers. And that's when he arrives at Sapphire's apartment and asks her how she could betray him, and especially for her, for his old best friend. And she, begins to declare her undying love for him, despite the fact that he looks like Metamorpho. That she declares she'll always love him, and that she has no desire for John, and that he's been mistaken. And that's where at this point Rex kind of decides, he kind of gets to the bottom of it and figures out, oh, this must be Stag's doing, and sort of runs off to attack Stag at that point.
How could you?
Rex?
You heard me. How could you dump me like that?
What are you talking about?
My so-called buddy Green Lantern. But who wouldn't rather be with a superhero instead of a freak like me?
How could you even think that?
Don't bother denying it. I know what happened.
Shut up and get this through that thick head of yours. I love you, you big dope. And I always will, no matter what.
But the pictures, I saw you and John together and...
Whatever you saw was a lie. Who showed them to you?
It was... Good Lord. How could I have been so blind?
Rex, wait, come back!
And to confront Stag. And that's where we get our next little fight sequence that happens as he shows up. And well, actually, before that, he shows up at Stag's penthouse, just as Stag is sort of celebrating that he's about to have this meeting, because the board, wouldn't you know it, now that he has this video of Metamorpho in action against the Justice League being successful, they're ready to whip out their checkbooks. And boy, if Stag doesn't just rip off one of the best lines maybe ever in support of capitalism here. And after he celebrates his windfall, that's when Rex shows up. But Java is able to subdue him by just some science and chemical reaction here. Every chemical reaction stops at 0 degrees, they say. So they freeze him and begin transporting him sort of across town in an attempt for him to sort of debut to this board, but he escapes in the meantime. So Simon Stagg, what did you know, was able to get his hand on an extra bit of that mutagen, no thanks to Java, as he reminds him. But in the process, Rex shows back up and sort of interrupts the experiment that's beginning to happen, and this causes another chemical reaction between Metamorpho himself and the mutagen. And we see a little bit of change at this point from Mr. Stagg as he becomes sort of this giant mutagen monster, or synthoid, as he's later referred to.
Yeah, so I do have some questions about what this machine was that Stagg was using. He's apparently... because it's like he's working on, I guess, fixing this mutagen and preparing it so he could create an army of Metamorphos potentially. But he's doing it. He's in this like virtual reality thing with like it's wires attached to, I guess, whatever the computer is that's controlling the container that has the mutagen inside of it, and it's attached to his hand. Like there's wires, and based on what happens, those wires have to be attached to his brain, like hardwired into his cerebral cortex here. Mm-hmm. Because as Metamorpho breaks into he knocks out Java, and as he's trying to destroy the mutagen to prevent anyone else from becoming part of it, he causes a jolt of electricity, which fries Stag's brain. And creates there's a little green puddle of this, like, I guess, this not yet completely synthesized version of the Metamorpho mutagen, which Metamorpho then walks in, which makes it glow purple. And then a giant green guy who looks like, who occasionally, when he's begins to speak or when he's shape changing, he like takes the form of Simon Stagg briefly. And as we find out, we get a little, again, this is the dialogue I was talking about and how it relates to him being creepy with his daughter, which is they mention that it's his raw, most base desires and impulses.
Yep.
Are what's so it's not his full consciousness that's been transferred into this synthoid mutagen being, but it's what he wants and what he feels at his most sort of base, and so it's all aggression and anger and
more trouble.
No, he's here to help.
I see you've met Stag Synthoid.
Learn anything?
Yeah, don't hit it with an energy mace.
Maybe we can talk to it, reason with it.
Not a chance. It's totally mindless.
No, I sensed a mind within the creature. Incomplete, irrational, and driven only by base desire.
Maybe the feedback from the accident transferred part of Stag's mind into it.
So what's it after?
Oh no.
The gigantic creature has defeated the Justice League. Now it's continuing its rampage and heading relentlessly uptown. Residents are advised to evacuate.
So he goes on a rampage throughout the city. Superman and Hawkgirl, Martian Manhunter, they all try to stop him. They're not really able to because of what his powers are. And And in the process, Metamorpho and John sort of have their moment of making up, and they go off to try to help the battle. And in the meantime, the synthoid has went to Sapphire's apartment. Sapphire is watching a news report where Snapper Carr is informing us that the beast is defeated the entire Justice League and is rampaging uptown, and she's just sort of sitting quietly. Apparently she didn't think at any point she should evacuate along with, I assume, the rest of the city. But she is in fact grabbed by the synthoid, and that sets up our, and we'll certainly get into this more in visuals, but our King Kong homage as the giant monster grabs the blonde girl and begins to sort of rampage uptown. The Justice League kind of continues to be ineffective even with Metamorpho's help, but Batman, who stayed behind the lab, is able to sort of figure out that because of the sort of chemical compound that this synthoid is made up of, they could theoretically synthesize something that would neutralize it. And though John doesn't want Metamorpho to do it, Metamorpho knocks him out and then gets Batman to sort of tell him the ingredients and turns in to the antidote himself and destroys Simon Stagg. So another thing I would like to talk about is when the synthoid is injected with the Metamorpho peptide, I believe they refer to it as, that kills the monster. They flash to Simon Stagg, who has been brain dead in a hospital bed, who sits up, looks directly into the camera, and screams at the top of his lungs. You see like a heart monitor going very fast, and then he just collapses and it cuts away. Is Simon Stagg dead? Is my question.
Unknown. I'm not sure. I think the case could be made either way, but I think it's very unclear and intentionally left ambiguous. We know that he doesn't return, so it could. If you told me that he was dead, I would say you are correct. You are not wrong. You could be right.
Okay, that's just where I was waiting for like the groan, or to at least hear the heart monitor keep beeping a few more seconds, but they kind of just cut right as his head drops back onto the pillow. So I was not quite sure if they managed to somehow squeeze an on-screen death into this children's show or not. But yes, that it seems that all hope is lost, and though the monster has been destroyed, it looks like perhaps Metamorpho has too. But as they're sort of the Leaguers are sort of discussing it, and Sapphire begins to warn him, out of this orange oozy puddle grows Metamorpho back to his normal self, and he and Sapphire are reunited, and John sort of has a moment with one more moment with Hawkgirl where he has kind of made peace with his decisions to go his particular route in life. So that's where we end things here. Like I kind of said earlier, I really like part one. I think it's really good, and it sets up something interesting. It's cool that we get so much focus on John Stewart and such a deeply personal story for him, not only because it's his best friend who's in trouble, but also because it's also, a best friend that he truly was maybe a little bit jealous of, if only for a moment. He had to sort of consider what was, what his life could have been. I really liked that. Mm-hmm. And then part two is mostly just Metamorpho punching stuff, and then the League fighting a giant green monster. And that's fun in a different way, and we'll certainly talk about it in visuals in a moment. But it's less interesting, I think, from a story perspective. So all things considered, I settled on a 7 out of 10 for my plot score.
Nice. Yeah, I actually gave it the same score. I gave it a 7 out of 10. I think that there are points where it drags just a little bit. In the first episode seems to be a very slow build, and then we get a rapid, like, nonstop action for the second episode. Pretty much it's just we go from that big fight to the little battles between Metamorpho and Stag, and then the big green monster is a huge fight at the end. So it really feels like a huge whirlwind in that second episode, with very little time to breathe in between these fights. which is not typical, I feel like, for most DCAU stuff. You usually get, fight, a little bit of a lull, fight, a little bit of a lull, and then like culminating in one giant action scene. And this felt like, at least for part 2, which again, I'm okay with changing up the formula. It felt like maybe that could have been used a little bit more in part 1. We do have the runaway train that takes place in the first episode, but it's really sort of the cliffhanger between John and Metamorpho. And some of the stuff, like I said, you can kind of poke holes in the story. Like, again, why does Rex why does he need to investigate this thing? The creepiness that Stag is going to his base desire, or his base, what did they say, his base impulses and instinct is to go get his daughter. Like, what does that mean? What's the undercurrent there? It's a little bit creepy. And then we kind of just basically do King Kong for the last 5 minutes of the episode, which is, again, it's okay. If you're gonna give an homage to a classic giant monster movie, then why not go with one of the best ever? So I do appreciate the little wink at the camera, because Rex even says what he wouldn't kill for a biplane right now, which I thought was at least the characters are acknowledging the similarities of the predicament that they find themselves in. But yeah, it's overall, I think part 2, because it does have that giant battle between Metamorpho and the majority of the League, I think that it lends to being a little bit more entertaining. But I think part 1 felt a little bit more like almost like a classic Batman the Animated Series episode. Obviously, parallels between a person transforming into this monstrous creature was sort of a staple of the Batman the Animated Series episode. So maybe that's why it felt so grounded in that. But that sort of slow build through the first episode to the second episode felt much more classically like those 2-part episodes, like a Two-Face or a Clayface, where you have the monster, and obviously this differing at the end where the monster is actually redeemed instead of just being a straight up villain. So at least it differs a little bit there.
Yeah, like I said, it's not perfect, but I think there's good setup, and we talked about it. It feels like it's a good character episode for John, if nothing else.
Now, it does, of course, differentiate from the classic origin story, at least in the comics. We'll talk about the comics in just a moment here, but just quickly mention that the original origin for Metamorpho was Simon Stagg. Similar, Simon Stagg was not happy that Rex Mason was stealing his daughter or whatever, so he sends him to Egypt, where there's like an orb, and the orb gives Rex these powers and stuff like that. So it was a lot more like 1950s, 60s sci-fi, goofy comics. So I do appreciate that they sort of went all right, well, if we're going to change it, we'll just do the homage to Marvel Comics characters' origins here with noxious gas chemical explosions happening.
Yeah, this is, I think, metaphor for, and that kind of works, especially because Metamorpho is kind of one of those characters that feels more, it's like that weird sort of seedy, evil body horror science stuff that we see a little bit of. And actually the writer credited with creating Metamorpho was also I think one of the original writers on the Doom Patrol series. So I guess he just had that mind for that sort of mixing of horror and monster stuff with the superhero. So yeah, I think that origin kind of fits that well enough, and maybe fits that motif a little bit better.
Absolutely. That, of course, being Mr. Bob Haney. We'll talk about the co-creator of Metamorpho in just a second here. But Liam, we'll move on to visuals here, visual and animation. So lots of fun stuff to be had here. Anytime you have a character who sort of, goes outside the lines here as far as physics are concerned, Metamorpho obviously sort of combining all of the great things that we enjoy about those stretchy guy characters, but also as, even beyond that, you get a little bit of Clayface style type things because he's made up of these 4 different elements. So you get physics thrown out the window. He's stretching. He's turning into gas. His hands are turning into diamonds at one point. He can shape shift into various different, tools or whatever he needs to do. He's shooting projectiles out of himself. He's changing into water. I think Metamorpho as a character himself is tons of fun, and I think probably the obvious one to go to when looking at this episode.
Yeah, absolutely. That's like, as you said, it's almost an excuse for the animators, the storyboard artists, the directors to show off. But yeah, from kind of his first transformation, as we said, we get this, that very much right out of the original comics, as you kind of alluded to. But we, that first image where he looks into the mirror and sees himself and breaks the mirror and then runs out into the street, and thank goodness somebody thought to put underpants on him when he rips his hospital gown off. But yeah, as soon as he's hit by that truck and kind of is splattered across it, and then sort of slowly reforms himself and has that sort of first interaction with the cops that we already mentioned. But then I think maybe the most fun visual stuff from Metamorpho definitely comes as we sort of talked about a little bit in plot there is that fight scene with the Justice League, where he sort of systematically is kind of taking them apart one by one. He fights Green Lantern at the end of part 1, but as you mentioned, he turns to kryptonite to fight Superman. He sets himself on fire but even before he takes out Jean in Jean's dragon form, there's this moment where John, as the dragon, sort of flies towards him, and Metamorpho sort of turns his lower half into like a spring, and he has like a hammer on one hand and an axe on the other, and sort of the two tails are sort of intertwining and wrapping around each other as they try to get the upper hand before Jean sort of wraps him all up in the dragon body, which he sort of gets out of with the fire. He uses like cement or something to sort of ground Hawkgirl at one point. And yeah, I think maybe the most fun stuff is that one fight scene we get where it's Metamorpho versus the Justice League for me.
Yeah, that whole scene, like you said, the Martian Manhunter bit, just him sort of having at every turn an answer to each of the heroes, and really feeling like this is an actual legitimate threat to the Justice League at this point. Figuring out at every turn, it feels like he's besting them and has an answer to sort of to outsmart or to work around their powers in a way. So I really, really do enjoy that. It's such a fun sequence, and really makes Metamorpho feel like a legitimate threat. Like, how could one man take on the Justice League? And then you realize, it's because he can change forms so much. And at least 2 out of our 4 attacking heroes here are vulnerable to very specific elements, and he's smart enough to use those to his advantage. But backtracking just a bit, one of the things that we talked about just briefly before we went on the air was I think one of the things that stood out mainly to me is when you watch this episode, because Simon Stagg is the first person other than these 2 nameless construction workers that you see, his design is so unique. He's got these big hairy eyebrows that come out almost of his eyeballs, and he's got these thick dark lines that are under his eyes. And Java also, as you mentioned, he's got this caveman hulkish looking face, and very apish or primate looking human. And then Metamorpho himself also has those same thick lines underneath his eyes and these real like multiple lines across his face. It's a very unique look than what we're used to the streamlined look of the rest of the heroes in the series. And I sort of was like, man, why did they choose to do that? So I kind of did a little digging, just curiosity. And his first appearance, I actually learned something here. So not only we mentioned before, Bob Haney was the co-creator of Metamorpho, but the reason I think that they ended up going with this specific look for those specific characters and Sapphire Stag actually is because the artist at the time was a young lady by the name of Ramona Fradon, hopefully pronouncing that correctly, or Fradon. I'm going to go with Fradon just for my sake, but it could be any of those. So apologies if it isn't. But she actually is credited with co-creating. She was the artist at the time on the Brave and the Bold comic. It's Brave and the Bold number 57, where Metamorpho debuted. And she was actually thinking about it. This was in the 1950s. She was an artist at a time where even today, nowadays, we do have some. It's more common to have female artists, I think, in the comic book industry. And there's, some of the top artists today are females. But thinking about it at the time in the 1950s, this was a very male, even more so male dominated space. And Ramona Fradon was integral to the design and the of this character and the look of this character specifically. We read a little interview where she was talking about why she went with like specific colors, representing each of the four elements that that are a part of Metamorpho, and how much fun she had based on being able to design the characters, and how that sort of was the symbiotic relationship with Bob Haney's writing. So he wrote goofy things so that she could make crazy designs, and she could do crazy designs that influenced his crazier writing. So it was this really cool thing to realize. So I think based on that, it felt like that the creators here really went all out to sort of stay very true to those original designs as an homage to her and her specific style, being the trailblazer that she was. Again, in this very male-dominated industry, creating a very integral character and having this very specific design that is not all that different than a Jack Kirby or Steve Ditko looking characters from that time, but maybe just a little bit softer.
Yeah, I think it's funny when you had pointed that out to me. I was not aware of this, so you if you want to know who did the research this week, it was all Cal. but yeah, no, it was it's really almost 1-to-1. Like, as much as we've talked about that in the past with, as you mentioned, Jack Kirby designs of some of the New God characters and stuff like that, how they sort of adapted it as close as they possibly could to the original source material, and just sort of maybe slightly sharpened it up or simplified it a bit for the DCAU style. That is exactly 100% what they did for Metamorpho, for Java, and for Simon Stagg as well, and for Sapphire as well, who they're all pretty much taken right out of that original comic from the Brave and the Bold there. So yeah, it's a really, really impressive and a great job of paying homage to those characters and kind of their earliest appearances, and again with something like Metamorpho's design, it's also, I think, an example of how much she nailed it right out of the gate with that design. Because it's also kind of a case of if it ain't broke, right? So it was really cool to see that design brought to life and so faithfully from that original source material. So yeah, I like I said, I think that's sort of shown off again in the action beats with Metamorpho in part 2, and then eventually in the final fight there. Like I said, it's fine. There's some fun moments, I think, when Superman and Hawkgirl are first sort of interacting with it, and Superman kind of takes a few swipes at it, and the face sort of gets distorted and muffled, and Superman mentions it's like punching dough, and it doesn't seem to have all of Metamorpho's abilities, or maybe it's just not smart enough to use them. It does sort of create a gas at one point that it uses to knock out Superman and Martian Manhunter, and then I think it turns its other arm into foam at one point. But I think maybe the creepiest part of this giant monster is towards the end there, when Mason is sort of confronting it and trying to get it to let Sapphire go, and then we sort of see the face change into Simon Stagg's, as you mentioned, the Wolverine Widow's Peak, so to speak, here, and sort of begins to slowly talk, and we'll certainly talk about that a little bit in voice acting too. But yeah, there's I will say, as the monster also obviously is sort of reminiscent of the DC character Chemo, who's been a long time foe of the Justice League and DC characters as a whole. So a giant green monster made of chemicals. There's obviously some similarity there, but they never call it that. They never they refer to it only as the Synthoid here. But yeah, I definitely think the standouts are from the action standpoint. It's funny. It's almost the reverse of what we said in our plot, which is, I think, while part 1 is maybe a little bit lighter on the action, it's got a lot of fun. It's got a lot of fun story stuff, and now here part 2 is light on the action, but is not light on the action. It's the reverse. It's maybe less story stuff, but it definitely makes up for it by a lot of good superhero action, and I really like kind of the coloration of those final moments of Metamorpho transforming himself into this peptide that's going to destroy the monster, and then sort of jumps inside of the monster, and you can kind of see the agent like dispersing throughout the monster's body because it has this sort of green translucent body as it sort of takes over, and slowly it turns the green monster into this bright orange that's the color of the mutagen originally was. And as it sort of melts away, you again sort of see its face transform again. So yeah, overall, I think there's a lot of good, strong stuff here. Again, mostly in part 2, but because of that, I came to another pretty strong 8 out of 10 for my visual score.
Nice. I really loved this episode visually. I think clearly, as you mentioned, the animation studio had a lot of fun. I'll try and go rapid fire to go through some of my favorite moments here. I think kind of going back, you mentioned the final scene where as Metamorpho confronts the synthoid, he has that bit of transformation part. There's a lot of horror elements that are used sort of throughout this, starting with the transformation where Metamorpho is stuck in this, where Rex is stuck in this tube, and these, the chemicals are released onto him. We get sort of the classic, hand up against the glass, dragging down, as the scene cuts, and you're not quite sure what's happened to the hero, or to Rex in this case. You sort of see his hand coming down the glass, leaving streaks on it. So a classic horror element there. I think the initial transformation that we get of the synthoid, also you get sort of a more defined Simon Stagg face that sort of morphs into the more monster face at the first bit of transformation back in the warehouse. And so there's definitely some elements of horror that occur here. I think even in the fight between the Justice League and Metamorpho, as they're sort of trying to determine what's going on, and Superman shows up to save John, as we mentioned, Rex's hand turns to kryptonite, and then as he begins to kill Superman, Hawkgirl shows up to save the day and just smashes his head completely off. A lot of violence that could happen to this character because he's made of chemicals and he could bounce back, but you smash his head completely off, just leaves this absolute giant divot in the body of Metamorpho, only for it to sort of slowly reform. And then we also get that sort of horror element again at the end when after he's transformed himself into the peptide, the synthoid has exploded, and then we get the reformation, and you're not quite sure. Even the Justice League isn't sure whether or not it's the synthoid coming back, and then he's sort of reaching out towards Sapphire, but it's from the perspective of the viewer. It's reaching out towards you. It's very horror movie-esque again. So that theme throughout is they use some of those horror elements, and that really, really, I think, reflects back on those more horror sci-fi elements that you mentioned that the creators of this character were sort of grounded in. So I love those neat little homages. I thought Green Lantern got a pretty cool showcase of, hey, he didn't use any constructs, but I do like the fact that he got to stop a train with his ring, or to try and stop a train with his ring. There's a really great moment where they're in pursuit of a stolen armored car, and he gets to slice the armored car, stands in front of it, slices it in half, and then the car splits around him. I thought that was such a badass move. So fun to see. And then even Hawkgirl, as they're trying to figure out how to fight this synthoid after he's sort of bested against Superman, and Hawkgirl hurls her mace at him right through his throat. It begins to sort of electrocute him, and then he launches the mace right back at her. I thought that was a super fun, little goofy visual of him sort of belching the mace back at her, and her just sort of shaking her head and saying, well, that didn't work. But you also mentioned the coloration. I think the coloration throughout this, the palettes that they used, you get a lot of blues. There's one particular scene, I think it's the scene where Mason is escaping from his captors and breaks out. The skies are this beautiful, orange fuchsia blue mixture that sort of line up with the color palette that Metamorpho himself is. So it really sets the scene, and it's a really different look than we're typical. It's not a plain red sky or a plain blue sky. So you really get a beautiful like sunset type of looking sunburst sky. And yeah, I think the mutagen monster, of course, and then the homages to King Kong, of course, throughout are just, you know, who could miss those and couldn't enjoy those. I will say there was one minor production flub that I didn't even see the DCAU wiki pick up on, but early on in the battle, they actually cut and you can see what's standing in place for the Empire State Building in the background, and the antenna is already bent on it prior to it being bent later on in sort of the culmination of the fight between Metamorpho and the mutagen monster on top of the building. So, but then it's straight up at the beginning of that sort of sequence there. So they reused the backgrounds there for that. And I think the DCAU wiki said they also had potentially reused backgrounds from the Terrible Trio episode of Batman, the animated series, for where Rex is. So maybe this, they don't really say where this takes place, right? What city this takes place in. So
no, cops looked, I thought it was Metropolis, but they never say that, if that's the case.
Maybe it's like a suburb between Gotham and Metropolis, and like that he now owns the penthouse where the Terrible Trio were hanging out back in that episode, since those guys went to jail.
I like it.
Some good continuity there. You can make it work. It's canon until proven otherwise, right?
Absolutely. That's our motto on the show.
There you go. But yeah, I really loved the visuals for this. I think it's super fun. I think Metamorpho is the star, and the various different ways that he's able to sort of manifest his different powers, and just kind of having no rules with him, whether it's him floating as a floating head with gas as his body as he's flying around, or him using his hands as pickaxes to climb up the side of the Empire State Building stand-in, or him turning into water and coming out of the faucet in Sapphire's bedroom. Just some really cool, fun stuff, and would have lended to an interesting follow-up, because unfortunately, other than a few cameos, we don't get another Metamorpho episode, like a Metamorpho-centric episode. So for all those reasons, though, the visuals are great and outstanding, and especially I think the homages to Miss Ramona Fradon's original designs. I felt like I had no choice but to give this a perfect 10 out of 10.
Love it. Yeah, I think, like I said, I think everything's pretty darn strong. And I think this is one of the first things I'm remembering. There's definitely some digital effects mixed in with the fire, and with when he's sort of, some of the projectiles are like hitting off of Green Lantern's shields and stuff. You can definitely tell that that it's some CGI there, but it's
water.
Not the. But it's not, oh yes, the water as well. Yep. But it's not. It didn't feel super jarring to me the way some of the integrations of those digital backgrounds or vehicles or some of that stuff. I thought it was integrated pretty seamlessly. So and there was a fair amount of it throughout these two parts there. So a good job by the digital effects team as well.
And I think that just that brief little sequence of him sort of turning his body into a spring, Jean turning into the dragon, and them sort of flying up into the air, sort of twisting around each other, and then coming to blows, and then Jean sort of overtaking him, him disappearing, and then him bursting out of Jean. I thought that whole sequence is just like, you could put that on and teach a masterclass of just beautiful animation. Like that thing is so good.
Absolutely. It's really quite a fun sequence.
All right, Liam, let's move on to our next category, and that is going to be music. So I didn't have a ton for notes here, other than I did make some notes during the runaway train sequence. There was some great music there. I will say I missed. There's a perfect spot, I felt like, where they could have used the Shirley Walker Superman theme, that being where he sort of swoops down and rescues Lantern, and they play this alternate heroic sounding theme, but it's just like heroic generic theme number 4 or something like that, which made me a little bit disappointed in their choice for punctuating that moment. But I think the rest of the musical notes that I had mainly were for the battle sequences. Those, of course, are drumming up the excitement and certainly are meant to get your pulse running a little bit. Certainly in the culmination of part 2 as the synthoid is climbing the building and he has Sapphire in his hand, we get the pulse quickening, tempo quickening drums and orchestral music that's played throughout. But other than that, I didn't really have anything that necessarily stood out too much. What about you?
Yeah, I think what stood out to me, ironically, was there's a lot of scenes that just have no music. The opening bit, I think when Stag is talking to the boardroom, doesn't really have much. A lot of those early scenes in part 1 where John is talking to Rex at his apartment, there's a little bit of sort of like the sultry saxophone music brought in when Sapphire first appears, but kind of the first part of that scene. And then I think when Stag and Jabba are kind of sitting at his I guess it's Stag's house, sort of talking about the success of the Metamorpho program and all that, there's not really music at the start of that scene. So it's a lot of silence where they're really just allowing whatever's happening on the screen and of course the voice acting, which we'll get to in a moment, to kind of work on its own. So I thought that was interesting as a sort of musical choice there to sort of to hang back as much as it does here. But yeah, I think that is something. I think the lack of the familiar themes being brought back was also interesting, because I feel, it feels like there's definitely that moment for Superman, and I think there's a moment in part 1 certainly when we sort of first see Batman sort of sneak into the crime scene where the train is derailed, and then again a little bit later he's sort of hanging off of a light fixture still at the subway station, all in shadow. And it feels like there were some moments they could have brought it in just for a moment or two there. Really any kind of like stronger atmospheric music that we're used to there. So yeah, there's nothing wrong with it. I didn't have any problems with it, but I also just felt it didn't really stand out a ton for me. So I ended up with a 5 out of 10 for music this week.
Yep, I also went with the same score, 5 out of 10. Nothing offensive, other than being a slight disappointment that there was no Shirley Walker Superman theme used when Superman arrives or when he tries to take on the Beast later on at the end of part 2. But overall, otherwise, just a big bag of okay this week. All right, Liam, let's move to our final category this week, which is going to be our voice acting. So we have a lot of our normals here, but we also have a couple of guest actors also that played some memorable roles on other cartoons that you might have been watching in the mid-90s. So let's talk about this week's voice actors.
That's right. So first and foremost, we'll have Richard Mall as Jabba, who of course is most famously to people listening to this show, he was Two-Face / Harvey Dent on Batman the Animated Series.
Unrecognizable.
Yeah, I would not have pulled this out in a million years, which speaks to both his talent and the genius of Andrea Romano as far as casting him and casting such a voice actor who had such a familiar and important role in this universe already, but allowing him to just really lose himself and give a completely different type of performance than what we were used to with his Two-Face.
Hey, is that the stuff? Luckily, I was able to get another shipment of the mutagen. No thanks to you. Now we can shift into full-scale production.
Yeah, absolutely. We've seen that before, where characters who have played other characters both prior and post their most notable roles in the DCAU, and sometimes it can be distracting. This was not one of those cases, which just goes to show you what a great voice actor that he's able to sort of put on the voice that he does for both Harvey Dent and then later Two-Face. But it's great to see the name there, and great also that it wasn't distracting.
Absolutely. Elsewhere in the cast, we have playing the voice of Sapphire Stag, we have Danica McKellar, who we've talked about a lot on this show, not only because we've reviewed a couple episodes of Young Justice where she plays Miss Martian, but also, of course, she's done voices, I believe, Frida on Static Shock, and has done a lot of other voices. She's good. Like, she doesn't get a ton to do. But I think she does get to show a little bit more in part 2. And first, when she's having that interaction with John, when she's sort of so upset about, or I guess that's the end of part 1, where she's having the interaction with John about how upset she is that, just begging John to help him, and then later on in part 2, when Metamorpho confronts her about this imagined affair that she's having with John Stewart, who she met 5 minutes earlier.
She was incredibly flirtatious with him. I will say that.
She's a very physically affectionate woman, clearly. But yes, so I think she gets a little bit to do more in part 2 when she's sort of interacting with him as Metamorpho, and we get some good classic, just the high pitched screams as very much playing her part of the King Kong homage that we talked about.
Yeah, I actually really, really, really thought that her screaming, she screams Rex at the end as Metamorpho goes to sacrifice himself, by turning into the peptide that's going to defeat the synthoid. And she does a really concerned, heartfelt scream of Rex, knowing that he's going to sacrifice himself. I totally believable. And I actually was like, that was great.
I love you, Saf.
That was really good and really done really well. She didn't have a whole lot to do. Like there wasn't a lot of other emotion that she had to do other than, again, when she's introduced, she's a little bit flirtatious with John. And then she sort of has to stand her ground with Rex in the next scene where they inform Stag that they're leaving. And then the rest of it is her just sort of, being surprised or scared or sort of heartbroken in various different forms. But I thought she was very believable in the way that she did it. So she got a thumb up from me for that.
Absolutely. And elsewhere, some rapid fire. Speaking of familiar voice acting names, we have Jason Marsden briefly as Snapper Carr, and we have doing the voice of the synthoid monster. Thanks to they also put sort of a hefty effect on it as well. But we have D. Bradley Baker, who is just like a one of the most talented voice actors there is. You would know him. He plays Klaus the Fish on American Dad. He voices, I think, all of the clones on the Star Wars animated stuff. So, wow. As well as has done a lot of he also does a lot of animal. Like when there's an animal that doesn't really have any spoken lines, a lot of times you'll see his name in the credit playing an ape or a dog or something like that. So he's just a really talented guy there. So I wanted to mention his name. And then playing the synthoid when it's in human form, that being Simon Stagg, we have a real legendary actor, I think, in Earl Bowen here, who is maybe more legendary to us personally because he was the voice of the ultimate bad guy on the Christian audio drama Adventures in Odyssey that we listened to when we were kids.
Yep.
But folks who were not raised in the church may know him more as a character in all 3 of the original Terminator movies, and as well as a ton of other voice work throughout his career. Done a lot of the voice acting in things like Kim Possible, in World of Warcraft video games. He was
Red Skull in the Spider-Man animated series.
Oh, very good pull there.
Marvel Universe. He was also the voice of whoever the guy is in Secret Wars. I don't know the name of the character, but he's
oh, the Beyonder.
Yeah, the Beyonder. Yeah, he's also the voice of the Beyonder in that final Secret Wars little bit that they do there. So yeah,
tons of voice acting to his credit, but and I mean this as a complete and total compliment. He is such a ham in that, and it's so much fun. There is no doubt, as we will, as we sort of touched on, how just this ultimate, corporate greed, like Lex Luthor thinks this guy is greedy, like the guy who ran Goth Corp thinks Simon Stagg is too slimy. Like he's just this ultimate like corporate bad guy. Doesn't, he's so frothing at the mouth at the idea. First in part one, when he's explaining that mining accident that he has the video of, he explains the problem isn't that someone died. The problem is that the unions might ask for more money to do that work if those sort of accidents keep happening. And then later on, as he sort of gleefully shouts when Metamorpho is fighting the Justice League, maybe this will even have military applications. Just no one, more than like Mr. Krabs on SpongeBob, this man loves money.
Well, is Metamorpho everything I promised?
Everything and more, Simon. We want him.
I thought you would. Let's set up a meeting for next week. And bring your checkbook.
I don't get it, boss. How are you going to get Mason to work for him?
Mason? He was just a prototype. Now that I've perfected the process, I don't need him anymore.
And he's just Earl Bowen doing a tour de force here as like the ultimate corporate evil businessman.
Yeah, it's really good. It's all summed up. If he had a mustache to twirl, he would be twirling it during his his delivery of all those lines. So yeah, it's really solid. It's really funny. And just a solid voice acting performance. It fits the character. It fits the greedy nature of him, the undercover bad guy of just being overtly hateable. Like, just so good. Yeah, his performance stands out. And again, a guy who continued to get jobs well into his 60s and probably later on than that, just because of having such a great, unique voice, but also being able to deliver just over the top performances when they're called for. So when you have the character of Metamorpho, who's sort of the antagonist for most of the first part, even though that it's even though Stag is behind it, you kind of have to have, based on who they cast as Rex Mason / Metamorpho, you kind of had to have somebody that was a little bit more demonstrative, I guess, a little bit more over the top, and to balance that out. So I think they did a great job of casting here. No surprise. So he got high marks from me as well.
Absolutely. And then we have Tom Sizemore as Metamorpho / Rex Mason, who's another character. I think he gets more to do in part one, because we first see him as kind of the suave business guy who's flirting with the lady on the train, and then has this this beautiful life with this the great job and the hot girlfriend, and then sort of as the episode unfolds and he's sort of alerted to this mutagen, and he sort of goes and confronts Stag, and then he's kind of twisting the knife a little bit later when he and Sapphire reveal to Simon Stagg that they are in fact in love and planning to move away, and sort of calls him dad, and really kind of has like a real kind of sarcastic, cocky nature to him, which is then sort of all literally and figuratively melted away from him once this accident befalls him. And then there's a real like panicked sort of manic anger to him, I think, for the rest of part one and into part two. And then I think when he kind of chooses to make that heroic sacrifice at the end, and sort of calls out to Sapphire as he's about to transform into this peptide that's gonna save the day. I think he gets to do a lot of different emotions, and kind of almost plays like three separate characters, as you have the Rex Mason, the suave guy, you have the kind of a little bit sarcastic and cocky, and then you have the sort of the angry, unhinged Metamorpho that he plays for the rest of part one and into part two, and then sort of the hero Metamorpho that he sort of becomes as that episode goes on. So he gets to do quite a bit throughout these two parts.
Yeah, and I think even though I just said that he was a little bit understated, I think that he does sort of come out of his shell, like you said, when he becomes the unhinged version of Metamorpho, but then settling back down into the more rational Rex Mason Metamorpho. Also, you're almost playing three different characters. So, you know, the fact that you're able to deliver a solid performance throughout, totally believable as the you know, the womanizing, you know, suave playboy that he is in the first couple scenes, sort of, you know, giving jabs at John, sort of teasing him about not being quite in the same place status wise as him. And then, you know, at the end, sort of having to turn into this sacrificial hero that's sacrificing himself to not only save his fiance or the woman that he loves, but to save his friend too. He goes out of his way to knock John out so that he can turn into the peptide to defeat the synthoid.
Thanks, but this is getting us nowhere.
Lantern, I've got something. The creature's composed of artificial protein. We can destroy it with a complex polypeptide.
Like a designer amino acid? How soon can you whip up a batch?
That's the problem. It'll take days to synthesize.
We don't have that long.
Wait. Tell me what's in the stuff. I'll do the rest.
Change into the polypeptide? Not a chance. If you come into contact with that thing, the chemical reaction will destroy you both.
Yeah, you're probably right. But I don't have time to argue. Sorry, pal, but Sapphire needs me.
Lantern, are you still there?
He's resting. What's the formula?
So, yeah, it's a solid performance all the way around. Again, it's disappointing that we didn't get another episode featuring him, so we could get more of his acting chops out there. But yeah, I think he delivers. It's a solid performance all the way through. When you step back and realize the three different personas almost that he had to play, I think it's appreciated even more.
Absolutely. And then that will bring us to our regular Justice Leaguers. Really only one or two of them get a lot of chance to shine, but we do briefly throughout the two parts have Kevin Conroy as Batman. We have Carl Lumbly, of course, as Martian Manhunter, and George Newbern as Superman. None of them get a lot to do, but they are present and fine for what's asked of them. But Maria Canales Barrera gets a little bit more to do as Hawkgirl in this episode. Like I said, mostly in part one, when she and John are kind of having a little bit of a heart-to-heart, she gets to bounce off a little bit of really the main star of this two parts from our main character standpoint anyway. That is, of course, Phil Lamarr as the Green Lantern. And again, I think another character who gets to go through a lot of the different emotions of the happiness of reuniting with his old pal to, kind of dealing with the tragedy of that and the jealousy that he felt and wondering what could have been that heart to heart that he and Shaira have after they take down the armored car robbery. I think is really good. And then, Phil Lamarr having to kind of reason with Metamorpho as Metamorpho attacks him at the end of part one, I think is really good. And then kind of all culminating at near the end of part two when Metamorpho decides he's going to transform himself into this peptoid antidote, and John doesn't want him to. So I think Phil Lamarr gets to show a lot of different emotions from happiness and jealousy and kind of a wistfulness to him, to then sort of being the classic hero that we all come to expect from his performance. So a nice job of him getting to stretch his legs a little bit here.
Yeah, I think it's no surprise we talk about him quite often, about his acting chops. But as you mentioned, so rare was it to have an episode sort of solely focused, especially early on here, on a single character's arc, and the fact that we sort of get his perspective and we get to sort of ride with him and his experience throughout. It's a little bit of a roller coaster, his experience of his emotions, losing a friend, trying to figure out if he is indeed jealous of his status, what it means to be a hero and to choose to sacrifice and not for personal gain and to continue to sort of soldier on here and to sort of express those emotions. And then again towards the end, as he sort of realizes his friend is back and has redeemed himself. This just moments after having this giant fight with him, where he's trying to reason with him and get him to come back. There's a huge range of emotions that he has also to express, and no shocker here that he's able to do so. But it's cool that we get to see this as almost like a solo episode of his for the main part of it there.
Absolutely, yeah. I think there's definitely a chance for him to shine there that when you're in an ensemble cast you don't always get. So I think that definitely works to the advantage here. So all around, I think, especially on the performances of Earl Boen as Simon Stagg and of course Phil Lamarr as Green Lantern, and a lot of the supporting cast did a great job as well. So I ended up with a very strong 9 out of 10 for my voice acting.
Nice. Yeah, I actually went with the same exact score, 9 out of 10. I think it's a strong cast overall. I think everybody really does a great job, but I think the standout certainly Mr. Bowen, and then of course Phil Lamarr doing the lion's share on the good guy side. So yeah, it's such a great cast, another great series of castings by Andrea Romano, and an overall a pretty great episode when it comes to the voice performances.
Absolutely.
All right, Liam. Well, that will begin to bring it. Oh, whoa. Well, that is that's the bonus point sound here. So that must mean that one of us here has. Well, that's the second bonus. We both must have bonus points. What are the chances here? It's as if I didn't know that was coming, despite the fact we discussed it, that we would have bonus points before the episode started. Liam, so I will start with mine. Mine's actually just giving a little extra bonus point, just again to those beautiful character designs. I really loved learning about Ramona Fradon's and her history and her place in comic book history. You learn little things every day, and just being able to learn that through this episode and through their faithful homages to those original character designs, I felt like just got an extra point for me. I really enjoyed that. I enjoyed learning about her as a comic book artist. Believe it or not, Miss Ramona is still kicking it at the young age of at the young age of 95 years old. So good health wishes to her, and continued long life for her. She's a legend that has a place in comic book history that maybe not a lot of people know about. So I definitely was not one that knew. So glad to learn about her. What about you? What's your bonus point?
That's right. So mine is a much less noble one than yours, which absolutely absolutely love that bonus point from you. But mine on a lighter side is the fact that when Simon Stagg is as I mentioned, the ultimate sort of literally and figuratively cartoonishly evil corporate bad guy, the ultimate corporate bad guy in all of the DCAU, perhaps. He utters a line which I never thought I would hear on a children's cartoon. I rewound it 4 times. It made me laugh so much. He, at one point, after he's gotten off the phone with the board, who wants him to go ahead and make a bunch of these Metamorpho soldiers, he's so happy that he's gonna get to make more money, which again we've established is all he truly loves, besides maybe his daughter. And he utters the line, "A toast, Java, to unbridled capitalism."
A toast, Java, to unbridled capitalism.
And it just kind of hangs in the air. There's no it doesn't cut. There's no irony to it. This guy loves capitalism, and he just had to shout it from the rooftops, and it just made me laugh so much. And the line delivery again from Mr. Earl Boen is tremendous, and Len Yulee and Dwayne McDuffie for writing that line. I'm not sure which one of them would get the credit for that specific line in the script, but incredibly funny line delivered perfectly by the director, and I'm sure Andrea Romano had a hand in that as well. So just a big thumbs up for that line, because I think it's one of the funnier single lines in the DCAU that I've ever heard personally.
So good, very funny, regardless of regardless of what you believe about capitalism, you can't help but laugh at the fact that they put that line in there.
And sort of unbridled capitalism.
Yep. That's one that you'll probably hear us refer to many, many times going forward here.
That's right.
I love that. Perfect. All right, Liam. Well, that will bring us to our total scores for this week's episode. So including my bonus point, a very respectable 32 out of 40 for this week's episode. What about you?
Yeah, and I had a pretty similar score, just a couple notches lower, but with everything, including my bonus point added up, I had a 30 out of 40. So pretty good strong showing from us as we get into rewatchability here. Metamorpho does come back later on in Justice League Unlimited. Obviously he doesn't have any speaking roles, but he is around, so this is the debut of that character. And then I think the other maybe point in its favor is that there's a little bit more GL Hawkgirl stuff, and it's a good character beat for John Stewart on his own, but then you also mix in that Hawkgirl's kind of there for him to open up to. I think I think this gets 1.5 thumbs up maybe.
I love that since we've introduced the half thumbs up now that we've further complicated this thing that used to just be, should we watch it or should we not watch it?
No, it's getting way worse.
I'm all for it. Let's do it. I think this gets a 1 thumb up for me as far as rewatchability is concerned. It's not really integral. That there is some you could argue there's some depth that's done again with the Hawk Lantern relationship.
If I could add one little caveat.
Sure.
We have not reviewed this episode yet, but do you remember what the future son of Hawkgirl and Green Lantern is named?
Is it Rex?
It's Rex Stewart.
Wow. Mind blown. You think?
I think. And I'm pretty sure that episode was also written by Dwayne McDuffie. So I would bet that was a little bit of an homage. So I think that might nudge it up to that.
Wow, that's really good. Yeah. All right. Well, all right. It's I'm still going with 1 thumb up. I don't care. You can.
All right.
It's not that pivotal to the character that his name is Rex. But it's still pretty. It's cool. But yeah, unfortunately, like we said, we don't get much more Metamorpho other than an occasional cameo in an episode. No speaking roles going forward. So there's not much use for that character going forward. You do build a little bit on the John character, gives him a little bit of depth, as you mentioned, but if you skipped this episode and came back to it, like I said, for the longest time, we only had part 1 on videotape and didn't know what happened in part 2, and it didn't really affect our lives in any specific way because we just went on living and nothing was seemingly missing from the catalog. So I would say, based on that, I would say it's 1 thumb up. It's an enjoyable episode. It's fun. The visuals are great. Good voice acting, as we already talked about. The plot might be a little but I think it's still enjoyable. So I'll give it 1 thumb up. All right, Liam, let's begin to wrap things up. Thank you, everybody, for tuning in to this week's episode. Don't forget to subscribe to us on your favorite podcast app, whatever one you listen on to. Subscribe to us. If it lets you leave a review, do that for us. That helps us out a lot. If it lets you leave a little blurb letting people know what you enjoy about us, go ahead and do that. Don't forget, if you listen to us on Spotify, you can check us out on the app. There are different options for you to interact with us. There's a question of the week that's posted there. There's a poll that's usually associated with it also, so check that out. Don't forget, also, this past week we also dropped our latest bonus episode, which covers the Justice League Infinity comic book, which is barreling towards the end here. We have just one more review to do after this past week's episode. So if you love the Justice League and you're interested in finding out what happens after Justice League Unlimited, go back in the archives at DCAUreview.com or on your favorite podcast app and check out the bonus episodes where we reviewed those comics. You can also, of course, get those comics at your local comic book store or on the amazing, wonderful Comixology app, or coming soon to the fantastic DC Universe app, the best app in the world, in my opinion. It's just a wonderful app. Liam, also don't forget we have a store if you're looking to pick up maybe a stocking stuffer or something. If you just want to throw some money, if you love capitalism just like Simon Stagg, so do we. Here's to unbridled capitalism. Support the pod. Pick yourself up a shirt or a hat, sticker of some kind if you want to. That's at DCAUreview.com. Click on the shop tab, or one free way that you can support us is subscribe to the Pod Tower YouTube channel. Head on over to YouTube and subscribe to the Pod Tower channel. You get our episodes, including the bonus episodes, every single week that they are posted. And then you also get content from our friends at Watchtower Database and Tim Talk. Liam, we have another episode coming up next week. However, we are breaking from our normal review cycle here, and we're doing something that we've only done one other time before, but we introduced a concept a couple months ago that was actually received really, really well. We put up an exciting poll on Twitter to determine who we would talk about next. But coming up next week, we have our second edition of the DCAU Spotlight series. So would you like to reveal just who we'll be talking about next week?
That is right. And so as I think we may have even talked about this on that original episode. Previously, we did an episode on Blight, who had 3 appearances or something and was pretty... and in one season of a show that was very easy to contain for the some of the more popular DCAU characters who are in multiple series, multiple episodes. It's a little bit harder. So this is going to be a volume 1. But since we are doing a month of Justice League, we're celebrating 20 years of Justice League, we decided we would pick one of the members of the Justice League. And we put a few up in a poll last week, had a lot of good feedback on that. And I could now reveal that next week we'll be doing our second ever Spotlight episode. It'll be volume 1 on this character. Many more to come in the future, I'm sure. But volume 1 of Hawkgirl. So Shaira Hall herself getting the spotlight next week right here on the DCAU Review. We'll be looking at all of her season 1 appearances, season 1 of Justice League, and maybe a little bit at her toys and her a little bit at the tie-in comics. But because she actually has so many more on-screen appearances, the majority of the time will probably be spent on the actual on-screen stuff. But we'll definitely look at those side things the same way we did in our previous Spotlight episodes. So I am very excited to look at that and to explore the early days of Hawkgirl in the DCAU. Very, very excited to look at that.
That's right. Shaira Hall fans, rejoice. Your queen shall arrive next week, and we are excited to discuss her. But until then, I'm Cal.
And I'm Liam.
And we'll talk to you on the next episode of the DCAU Review.
Bye-bye.